560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So on Friday, the Biden administration responded to the killing of 3 U.S. soldiers at that Jordan outpost by, after days of telegraphing these strikes were coming, giving the terrorists plenty of time to vacate, they launched airstrikes against Iran-backed militias in Syria and Iraq, knocking out a lot of empty storage facilities. I mean, apparently some command and control centers too, which is all well and good, but I'm not so sure that the telegraphing represents a impressive show of force against the leading state sponsor of terror. That would be Iran for now, although the Biden administration is trying to get America into that competition for that title. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Stephen Bucci, served America for 3 decades as an Army Special Forces officer, top Pentagon official. He's a visiting fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. Steve Bucci, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to be back on the show. Thank you for having me.
So how should we receive this strike on Iran-backed militias in Syria and Iraq and Yemen?
Well, you kind of hit it in your intro. It's the magnitude of it would have been great if it had been done 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the timing of it. You know, I've been advocating not that we hit targets in Iran. I understand the reluctance there. You don't want to kick off a war. You don't want to be seen as kicking off a war, even if you don't. But the proxies are the ones that are shooting at us, actually firing the missiles. I know they come from Iran, but if we had done the same strikes we just did without the telegraphs ahead of time, and specifically targeted the installations where our intelligence know that the IRGC advisors are living and working, we would have made Iran pay a price without hitting targets inside Iran. It would have made them squeal bloody murder, which is exactly what we want them to do, show them that they're not invulnerable. But doing what they did, the telegraphing, saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to hit other targets," and giving them time to evacuate their personnel, the Iranian personnel, was stupid. What's the mentality for that other than trying not to get Iran to walk away from the table, which they've already walked away from, and have told us they don't want a deal. We don't need a deal with them. They are not a country with which we can deal in the way the Biden administration and the Obama administration before them thought we could, but they persist with this delusion. And as a result, we get weak sauce response. A lot of bombs dropped, probably hit a lot of empty buildings.
Yeah. And nothing's going to change, right?
Not particularly. Why would Iran change? It'll wait a week or two and then filter their people back, fire off a whole new volley at our people and at Israel. This was just an ill-advised attempt at what I guess this administration thinks is moderation. The other guys aren't showing moderation. They're trying to kill our people. Right. Why don't we reciprocate?
Well, this is a serious question too. It's not even sarcastic, although it should be. Is it still the philosophy of this administration, sort of, get to premises? The premise is that Iran is still a potential partner in peace, even though it's the leading state sponsor of terror in the world, and we still want to strike a deal with Iran to fulfill this fantastical vision that these internationalists like Biden and Obama before him have of a stable, bipolar, meaning Saudi Arabia and Iran, Middle East?
Yeah, I think that really is their delusion. They think they can make Iran a responsible partner in a more peaceful Middle East. And the Iranians, someday the Iranians might be if they get a totally new government. But right now, with the government they have, the regime of the mullahs in Tehran, they have stated unequivocally over and over and over again that they don't want peace. They want to kill us, drive us out of the Middle East. They want to eliminate Israel completely. And they're more than willing to break every international law rule that's out there to do it. And they're doing it with the IRGC Quds Force personnel that they've emplaced all over the region and, frankly, all over the world. And instead of treating them as the adversaries that they self-identify as, we continue with this delusion. And it's just, you sit there and go, what is wrong with you people? How can you not see this? I mean, Ray Charles could see they are not going to be a partner for us now or ever until that regime changes. If you don't want it to change, you got to treat them the way they should be treated, which is as an enemy.
Former acting Defense Secretary Chris Miller had a piece in the Journal over the weekend about these drone strikes. And one of the other things he said, in addition to our response that we've been discussing, but something that we can address on our end, apparently, to help our soldiers better defend against all of these drone attacks. There have been some 160 since October, including the one that killed those 3 soldiers we talked about. He writes, though our troops have performed admirably, the Defense Department has failed to provide them with the best available technology to defend against these attacks. And he talks about this being sort of a bureaucratic holdup and an obstinance with respect to the Defense Department to be, with their 5-year budgeting plans, to be more flexible and resilient to address urgent needs in real time, which is sort of ironic for the military, but that there is there's technology to deal with drones that needs to be fast-tracked and deployed, and DOD isn't doing it.
Yeah, he's spot on. Chris used to work for me when he was a younger officer. Great guy, very bright, and he hit it on the head with this one. We had an entire process in place during the global war on terror to fast-track equipment. If a situation developed and somebody said, my gosh, this is kind of unique, we need some new tools to deal with this, we could send people out to find technologies that would address the problem, put it in this fast track, skip the whole bureaucracy. There was still oversight, don't get me wrong. It wasn't cowboy stuff, but it allowed us to skip a lot of the legislatively directed craziness that's in the defense acquisition process to get things in the hands of the troops who needed it in an amount of time that would actually affect the situation. Why are we not applying that same process now? I don't know. It looks a lot like we're in a war, or at least at the edges of one. We need to use wartime methodologies and processes. You cannot continue to do the old bureaucratic two-step where you take 5 years from concept to deployment. That's just unacceptable in today's world. And we have technologies that can address drones. All sorts of interesting things with microwaves, with all sorts of electronics. So it's not all bullets to bullets. And Chris knows that, and that's what he's talking about. And particularly with drones, we need to get off the dime and get this stuff in the hands of these kids we have out there at risk in the region and get it to them now.
Well, that drone that killed those 3 Americans, could it have been an American drone that was left over in Afghanistan?
It could have been, but it from what I have read and talked to people, it's much more likely that it's an Iranian drone. The Iranians produce a lot of drones. They're sending them to Russia. They're sending them to all over the Middle East. So that's the more likely outcome. It could have been, though. We left stuff in Afghanistan for the use of the Afghans, who ended up, letting the Taliban have it all. The Taliban doesn't need it all, and they are more than happy to sell it to friendly organizations like their fellow terrorists.
This Peace and Foreign Affairs magazine, they put their top people on it. They've got, 5 or 6 people that contributed to this deep think piece. Trump-proofing Europe, how the continent can prepare for an American abandonment. And it's interesting because it's a bit schizophrenic. On the one hand, they say Trump's demands for more from Europe when it came to transatlantic or global challenges actually made Europeans stronger. They had to, fend for themselves a little bit more as opposed to, waiting for America to do all the heavy lifting. But at the same time, of course, he weakened the bonds and he's opposed to multilateralism. And these are all reasons why they're rooting for a second Biden term. But I mean, just address that, because this is something that we'll hear, you have heard, we'll hear on the trail, that, the Biden administration has reestablished America's standing in the Western world, strengthening the bonds of friendship between ourselves and our European allies. And Trump was this disruptor that made the world more dangerous because we weren't all chummy with the Western Europe like we should be. That's basically the gist of it. How do you respond?
Yeah, and that's nonsense. Look, was Trump a disruptor? Absolutely. Trump said, we're not going to do business as usual anymore. I'm going to call a spade a spade. You guys are not paying enough for your own defense. You either pay up or we're going to walk away. And you know what? They started to pay up. Most of the allies changed their budgeting process and started pulling more weight and preparing themselves just in time to realize they had the capability to stand up to Russia when Russia went into Ukraine. Unfortunately, they may not have gone into Ukraine if Trump was still there, because they knew Trump would respond, and they were pretty darn sure Biden wouldn't. I think they were sort of surprised that Biden did what he did. But this idea that Trump is going to totally walk away from Europe, that's just silly. I mean, that's such hyperbole and pearl clutching. It's just ridiculous. He's not going to walk away from our allies in Europe. He may treat them differently. He's not going to be as solicitous to their crazy climate control wings of their parties. He's not going to put up with them saying, oh, well, this is the best we can do. You're going to have to do the rest. No, he wouldn't do that. He didn't do it during his first term. But that doesn't mean he's going to walk away. He didn't walk away before, and he's not likely to do it now. That is pure hyperbole and election year pandering to the fears of certain people to try and get them to vote for what has been a massively ineffective administration under Biden.
It strikes me as it's like, and you hear this, we've heard this before too, this line of argumentation, because the left's sort of out of ideas. So it's very much like the domestic discussion. Any sort of reconfiguring of welfare state programs to change incentives is, women and children starving in the streets. And in this case, any sort of reconfiguring incentives to make Europe, these proud European countries, shoulder a proportionate share of the burden when it comes to global responsibilities. And it's, France and Germany are going to be starving in the streets. I mean, the arguments are parallel because they're just not that creative. I mean, it's the same thing.
It's exactly the same thing. I don't know if you remember my old boss, Secretary Rumsfeld, making the comment, well, yeah, New Europe is willing to help us against the terrorists. The problem is old Europe.
Right.
And everybody went crazy. You know what? Nobody dropped out of NATO. Nobody did anything other than huff and puff and harumph like European bureaucrats tend to do. And then they realized, yeah, well, maybe we do need to change what we're doing a little bit. Or, the Americans are not going to trust us. They're not going to give us the influence in decision making if we want to play, we got to pay. And that's the same thing that Trump was demanding of them and requesting, that they act like the history-making peoples that they've always been, and instead of sitting there cowering in their capitals saying, "Oh, woe is us." You know what? If you want to be a player on the world stage, you got to come to play. And right now, people who are saying that, I'm sorry, that piece was such pandering. It's a shame. And the people who wrote it know better than that. And but they wrote it anyway because purely political reasons.
Stephen Bucci served America for 3 decades as Army Special Forces and a top Pentagon official, visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies now. Stephen Bucci, thanks as always.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and look forward to joining you next time.
Okay, thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Wealth Health Radio.
The biggest fears that people have is, do I have enough money to retire?
Retirement doesn't have to be complicated.
Make sure that you're going through retirement with confidence.
Learn principles of income planning.
There's a lot of different facets that you need to take into consideration when you're retiring.
Tune into Wealth Health Radio with Joe Murphy, noon to 1 p.m. Sundays on AM 560. The Answer.
Lots of channels, nothing to watch, especially if you're looking outside of big corporate control. It's time to interrupt your regularly scheduled programs with